Dr. Isabelle Gray had seen her fair share of strange places, but nothing like Black Hollow. The decision to accept the position as the village's only doctor seemed like a quiet escape from her fast-paced life in the city, a chance to help a community where she would truly be needed. But as her car bumped along the dirt road leading into the isolated village, unease settled in her stomach. The village lay in a hollow, surrounded by dense, ancient woods that blocked out the sun. Black Hollow's buildings were old, some appearing to sag under the weight of years. Windows were dark, and few people wandered the narrow, misty streets, casting wary glances her way before retreating to the shadows. Even in broad daylight, the village seemed to exist in a permanent twilight. Her new home and clinic were at the village's edge, a single stone house overgrown with creeping vines and ivy, its windows small and dark. She'd barely unpacked her bags when she noticed the silence. No birdsong, no chatter of animals, just the thick, pressing quiet. Her first day began with an early knock on her door. She found a wiry old man on her front steps, hat in hand, staring at her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Doc Gray, I presume?" He croaked, eyes flitting nervously around. "I'm Elias. Welcome to Black Hollow." Elias's request was simple enough: stitches for a wound on his arm, but he spoke in whispers, his voice tight with fear. "People don't leave here," he murmured as she cleaned the wound. "Not ever." She paused, meeting his eyes, but his gaze was empty and far off, like someone recounting a memory rather than making a statement. His fingers drummed anxiously on the arm of the chair, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. "Surely people have to leave for supplies, medicine," she started, but he cut her off with a quiet laugh that held no warmth. "They come back, or they're found," he said, his voice dropping to a murmur. "Dead most of the time, and in ways best left unsaid." That night, Isabelle woke to the sound of scratching, a soft, persistent noise coming from her front door. Steeling herself, she crept to the door and switched on the porch light, but no one was there. Only the faint, unmistakable scent of burnt wood hung in the air. The next morning, she found a symbol carved into the door, a triangle encircling a strange series of twisted lines and loops, something she didn't recognize. It was scratched deeply into the wood, as if with a blade. Uneasy, she scrubbed at the symbol, but it wouldn't come off. She decided not to ask the villagers about it. She'd had enough of their sidelong glances and evasive answers. But that night, she saw it again, burned faintly into her window, and on her car door. Each morning, it returned in a new spot, no matter how much she tried to erase it. The villagers only watched her struggle with grim acceptance, as though they knew something she didn't. Days later, Elias reappeared and invited her to a town meeting in the village square. Isabelle hoped to get answers, but the event only deepened her dread. In the flickering glow of old gas lamps, the villagers gathered, standing in tense silence. At the meeting's end, a wizened woman approached her with a sad, almost pitying smile. "You've done nothing wrong, dear. But this place, it has its ways." "What ways?" Isabelle asked, her voice tight with frustration. "The woods keep us here," the woman whispered, her eyes wide with a barely contained terror. "They're watching, always, and they don't like when people try to leave." Her days grew more stifling. She started to feel as though unseen eyes were following her every move, shadows shifting where none should be. In desperation, she decided to leave. Late one night, she packed her bags, loaded her car, and drove out of Black Hollow. As she approached the edge of the forest, fog thickened, swallowing her headlights. The road seemed to close in on her, trees bending as though to block her path. Her car sputtered, engine coughing, and then died completely. She could feel something watching, pressing in on her from all sides. And then she heard them, whispers carried by the wind, faint chanting echoing through the trees. She sat frozen as ghostly shapes appeared along the road, eyes blank and unseeing. Villagers, yet not quite. Shadows in their place, faces she recognized from the village. Each of them staring as though to say, "You belong to Black Hollow now?" When the fog finally cleared, she found herself parked back outside her clinic. A sense of resignation settled over Isabelle. She was beginning to understand, though she didn't want to admit it. That morning, she found Elias by the old well, his face drawn and haunted. "Black Hollow is more than a village," he told her in a trembling voice. "The place itself is alive in its own way. It feeds on us, keeps us here. The woods are its tendrils, reaching to catch anyone who tries to escape." "But why? How?" she demanded, grasping at her last shreds of logic. Elias looked at her with a pitying gaze. "The village's ancient, doctor. It's older than the forest, older than the land itself. Some say it was a temple, a place where dark rites were held long ago. When people first tried to leave, they changed. They became one with it." He pointed to the woods, where the trees stood silent, brooding. "Those who died trying to leave, they're taken by the village, their spirit bound to it. Every night they return to watch over us, a reminder that we're bound here forever." That night, she didn't sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling, trying to deny the truths that clawed their way into her mind. She was part of this village now, trapped as surely as the rest of them. And she felt the pull of the forest, the hum of the village's heartbeat thrumming beneath the ground, binding her to its ancient curse. When she finally drifted off, she dreamed of the symbol that had been carved onto her door. In her dream, it appeared on her skin, glowing faintly like a brand. She woke in a cold sweat and stared at her palm. The symbol was there, etched into her flesh. The next day, no one would meet her gaze. She was part of Black Hollow now, a permanent fixture in the village. The symbols were no longer warnings. They were marks of ownership, binding her to this place that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Dr. Isabelle Gray never left Black Hollow, and when the next doctor arrived years later, she was among the shadows that watched silently from the edge of the woods, bearing the same hollow, haunted look she'd once seen in others. No one ever left Black Hollow, and no one ever would.